That's too big. It's too early to know. Most people will tell you that to say too in Spanish, you just use the word demasiado. But actually, the word too in English doesn't have a perfect translation into Spanish. Depending on the context, you might use demasiado, or you might use another word like muy. But there's another word in Spanish that does imply the word too in English in a kind of weird roundabout way. I'm going to show you why it's impossible to translate too into Spanish, but we'll also learn a trick for making this work anyway. Let's break this down. Okay, let's start by actually exploring what the word too means in English. Here's a simple example. It's too big. So what exactly is the word too doing here? Well, technically speaking, this is an adverb, and here we're specifically using this adverb to describe how big something is. But there's something unique about the word too. So there are plenty of other adverbs we could use instead here. For example, we could say it's extremely big. Or on the other end, we could say it's not big. And then somewhere in the middle, we could say it's somewhat big. All of these words, extremely, not, and somewhat, are modifying our description of how big something is. But here's the weird thing about the word too. It doesn't actually live on this spectrum anywhere. Instead, what the word too does in English is it implies that something is too big for some particular purpose. For example, we can say that an 18-inch pizza is too big for one dinner. But we can also say that the planet Jupiter is too big for one dinner. Obviously, one is much more extreme than the other, but we still have to use the word too. And that's because in English, the word too is the word you use to say that something is inappropriate for a specific purpose. And Spanish doesn't really have any adverbs that specifically describe something as inappropriate for a specific purpose. But here's the plot twist. Spanish actually does have a very different word that does imply that something is inappropriate for a specific purpose. To show you how, let's go ahead and translate these two sentences into Spanish. The planet Jupiter is too big for one dinner. El planeta Júpiter es demasiado grande para una sola cena. This pizza is too big for one dinner. Esta pizza es muy grande para una sola cena. Look closely at what happened here. So in Spanish, we translated the word too in two different ways. In one case as demasiado, and in the other one as muy. But there's another key word later in the sentences, the word para. In a Spanish sentence, this is the key word that says that something is inappropriate for a specific purpose. And that's why the word too can get translated in different ways in Spanish. It actually works out. For example, when a Spanish speaker wants to say that something is too easy, they might say that it's demasiado fácil, or they might say that it's muy fácil. Either one can imply that something is too easy for a particular purpose. Here's another example. It's too late. The game already ended. Es muy tarde. El partido ya se acabó. Here, the Spanish speaker used the word muy, but the sense is not the word very in English. It would be weird in English to say, it's very late. Here, the word muy would have to be translated into English as too. The implication here is that it's too late for a particular purpose. Specifically, it's too late to watch the game. So as you can see, the word muy is actually very often translated as too when you go from Spanish to English. And this can actually lead to some weird mistranslations that actually happen all the time. For example, let's say a Spanish speaker is learning English. And what they want to say is, este café está muy caliente para tomar. They might translate this as, this coffee is very hot to drink. But English speakers would never say that. In cases like this, the word muy has to be translated as too. But again, the clue here is the word para. Whenever the word para is being used to indicate that something is inappropriate for a particular purpose, the English adverb earlier in the sentence will always be too. And then for another mistranslation, let's look again at the word demasiado. In everyday Spanish, this word does not just mean too. It's often just used to mean very, very. For example, let's say you want to say, the lake is very deep, but the ocean is very, very deep. A Spanish speaker is likely to say something like this: El lago es muy profundo, pero el océano es demasiado profundo. So you'll sometimes hear native Spanish speakers mistranslate sentences like this into English using the word to. And that's because it's commonly taught that demasiado and to are the same thing, but they're not. It's really weird for English speakers when this happens. If a Spanish speaker says, the ocean is too deep, we're like, what do you mean? Too deep for what? In the original sentence, that's not what was implied. We weren't saying the ocean is too deep for a specific purpose. Instead, demasiado was being used just to say that the ocean is very, very deep. So as a summary, here's a fun but weird multilingual way to think about this. The English word to early in a sentence always implies the Spanish word para later in a sentence. Let's look at some English sentences to show how this would work. When we say, this coffee is too hot, what we mean is this coffee is too hot to drink. So we might say in Spanish, este café está muy caliente para tomar. Or how about, they're talking too fast? The implication is we're saying they're talking too fast for me to understand. We're not necessarily saying they're talking very, very fast. We're just saying it's too fast for me to understand. This implies the word para later, even though it doesn't appear. So an expanded sentence might be, están hablando demasiado rápido para que yo pueda entenderlos. One more example. These shoes are a little too small. We're saying they're a little too small for my feet. The Spanish might be, estos zapatos son un poco pequeños para mis pies. And this is what's crazy. That last one uses the English word to, but it doesn't use demasiado, and it doesn't even use the word muy. However, it does have the word para, which is why we used the word to in the English. Once you can understand the nuances of how expressions like this work, you can truly start to think in Spanish instead of translating literally. That's the beauty of understanding how Spanish works. You can get to the heart of anything you want to say, not by translating word by word, because as we can see, that doesn't really work. Instead, you're actually expressing yourself the way that a native Spanish speaker would do. To get deeper into the mindset of how native Spanish speakers use the language so that you can communicate more clearly and accurately in Spanish on a deep level, you should dive into our free course at SpanishVideoCourse.com. This is a comprehensive program written by me and a team of native Spanish-speaking linguistic experts, and it'll help you reach Spanish fluency step by step with interactive lessons, focused drills, and clear explanations that make everything click. And it's all 100% free. You can dive in right now at SpanishVideoCourse.com or click the link in the description of this video. Meanwhile, subscribe to this channel for lots more grammar and study tips that'll get you speaking Spanish fluently faster than ever.